I'm Jeff Hennig. I'm professor of political science and education at Teachers College at Columbia, and I'm serving as the moderator for this panel. We've got a presentation, three-person presentation, and then we're going to have a short comment afterwards. Let me introduce the panelists, and then I'll turn it over to them. Arthur van der Veen is CEO of the Office of Innovation in New York's Department of Education. And in this role, he's leading an initiative to engage 400 schools in a 3-year process of reorganizing themselves around personalized models of learning. Prior to this, he managed the administration and development of the department's portfolio of summative and formative assessments. He also directs the department's education, technology, and knowledge management initiatives. From 2003 to 2007, he held several positions at the College Board, where he helped lead the design and development of the College Board's comprehensive reform model. Arthur received his BA from Colorado College in 1985, his Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary in 1989, and his PhD in English from the University of Texas at Austin in 2002. He's the author of numerous articles and chapters and presentations on college readiness, assessment design, comprehensive school reform, academic content standards, curriculum development, and alignment methodologies. Alyssa Berger is founding co-principal at the New York City I School, which is one of the New York City public high schools. Previously, she worked in the New York City Department of Education's central office as a director of leadership and organizational learning, where she oversaw 250 schools in reaching the goal of increased student achievement, and did so by developing and aligning and delivering cutting-edge training and professional development tools. These tools included the Children's First Intensive and Action Research Initiative designed to help build schools' capacity to use accountability tools to differentiate, individualize, and improve instruction. She also served as a facilitator for the scaffolded apprenticeship model, a master's degree program run through Baruch College, which is part of City University system. She began her career in school administration as the founding leader of the Mott Hall II School, a small progressive New York City public school. Anna Goldman is a third grade teacher at CS 154, the Harriet Tubman Learning Center. She began her career at PS 125, the Ralph Bunche School, making this her 10th year teaching in the Harlem community. Born and raised in Upper Manhattan, she attended the New York City public schools throughout her life, so she can probably provide a better historical perspective than almost any of the speakers we've heard today. Her educational experience includes a BA in sociology and a certificate in African American studies from the University of Maryland, and an a master's in teaching from Pace University. And then we're going to, at the end of the presentation, which is coordinated, we're going to hear from Laura Marsilio, who is Commissioner for Education, Family, and Youth of the Municipality of Rome, a position she's held since 2008. The City of Rome has direct jurisdiction over early childhood education up to 6 years old and provides a support role for compulsory education. The City of Rome has established educational programs to increase cultural awareness and civic pride amongst youth, and initiatives have been launched to increase the physical activity for students in primary schools, as well as provide them access to nutrition-based curricula and activity. And I think, if I understand it correctly, she'll be speaking more to explain some of those initiatives that she's involved in. Although she's listed as a commentator, I think it will be more in that role than commenting on the papers themselves. And with that, I'm going to introduce Arthur, who's going to start the presentation.
Thank you, Professor Hennig. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope to keep you awake for the last part of the afternoon. Hope you all had a chance to get some coffee. I certainly did. And we are very excited to share with you some of the work we're doing here in New York City around innovation in our schools. And our office, the Office of Innovation, was started about a year ago, a little over a year ago. You may have heard Chancellor Klein mentioned he felt innovation was something he wished he had started earlier. And though he's been innovating and the system's been innovating for the last 8 years, having a dedicated team of folks looking at new school models, many of which leverage technology in order to accelerate student achievement, that became the charge of this new office. And we've been working for the last year identifying creative new innovations both within and beyond the City of New York, and identifying schools and networks of schools doing this creative work and framing out a plan for the next 3 years to try some very creative and innovative stuff. So that is the very privileged position that I get to do, working in this very dynamic and creative city of New York, and it's been a thrill to be a part of this. We've heard all day long, I think, everyone's making the case for change, but it's something that we do remind ourselves of. Why are we even here? Why are we thinking about what further needs to be done? Because we've made a lot of progress in the last 8 years in New York City. But one thing I like to consider is that a system, and the Chancellor talked about a systemic approach to this work, thinking in terms of systems. Systems are designed to produce the outcomes that they produce. And so if we're now producing a 63% graduation rate, we can ask ourselves, is this system that we're currently using capable of doing much, much more than that? We are being faced with new, higher expectations here in the US and in the state of New York. With the Common Core standards coming, if you've had a chance to look at them, they are indeed much more rigorous and demanding of our students. They'll be in place in the coming 2 years. In addition to that, a set of new assessments that are coming through a consortium that are much more rigorous in terms of their focus on application, richer set of performances, much more challenging than the standardized assessments that we've been using in the past. Most recently here in New York State, the cut scores on our exams were adjusted to reflect those students who are actually graduating and prepared to perform in college at a college-ready rate. It's had dramatic impacts on the ratings of our schools and the percentage of students who are actually graduating ready. We know there is a lot more that we need to do. And so our charge in the Office of Innovation is to think about, can we wholly rethink the system? It's one of the nice advantages we're given to think in wholly new ways and then begin to translate that into new practices, new school models, new uses of technology to try to achieve really significant, dramatic new gains that we need to achieve if we're going to be successful with our students. So we start with kind of a baseline understanding of the nature of school today. And those of you who are any history of education know our model derived very much from an end of the 19th century model that came out of the progressive tradition that had a strong emphasis on standardization. We were looking for standard models, standard teacher criteria, standard definitions of what's called a Carnegie unit, enough seat time to justify granting of credit, standard length of day, standard length of school year. Tremendous, tremendous focus on standardization that's been the defining model for our schools since the late 19th century. And so you hear stories, we hear the Chancellor often saying, if you were to fall asleep 100 years ago and then wake up and walk into a classroom today, it would not be much different than what was seen at the last turn of the century, not this most recent one. As we think about then innovation, we've started to think about what would really be that Copernican shift, that paradigm shift. What would move us beyond the system as it's designed today in producing 63% graduation rates to really something wholly new? As we've thought about this over the last year, talking with our schools, talking with experts from around the world and in the country, we've come to this idea of a fulcrum of really shifting the relationship from teacher to student in their relationship to content and learning. If we can move to a radically student-centered model that puts the student at the center of their learning, empowers them to be directing their learning, responsible for their learning, self-managing in their learning, with all the requisite supports that's required to achieve that, what would the implications be for the way we think about school? With that shift, we came to a model that we call personalized mastery learning. It's at best descriptive. It's not the best. It's not the most catchy of phrases, but we do think it describes kind of the nature of a school that makes this radical shift toward a strongly student-centered model. And we've identified 5 design principles of a school that we think reflects this shift. It starts off with globally competitive standards. In New York State, in fact, nationally, we are all moving toward Common Core. Well, 43 of our 50 states are moving to Common Core. But it's more than just that. It's an openness to looking at other international frameworks, looking at TIMSS and PISA as international benchmarks for our work, looking at standards for 21st century learning, identifying those kind of cognitive skills that Alex Schub was describing yesterday that they were targeting for their graduates in terms of critical thinking, problem solving, problem formation, creativity, collaboration. That set of skills that are much more rigorous and require a very different model of teaching and learning if we are going to develop those capacities in our students that we know are critical to succeed in a 21st century workplace and in college. Personalized learning plans are another critical piece of this. We want to move to where each of our schools has a personalized learning plan for every student. Really thinking about and understanding where is each of our students on their learning pathways, and how can we begin to design curriculum, instruction, learning opportunities, and assessments that take them where they are and move them forward at their optimal pace through their optimal pathway. We've looked at models that are out there. We've been scanning and searching, and we found examples both in New York City and nationally and internationally. We have one partner that we're going to be working with is a school management organization in Sweden called Kunskapsskolan. Very interesting model that we're looking at. They work with their students in an advisory model where for every student they're developing out a 6-year plan to move from 6th grade to high school graduation, annual goals for each of those students, monthly goals, weekly goals. Teachers then advise students, 25 students in teams, to help them self-manage and self-direct against that goal setting and planning across the entire course of their career. That kind of personalization is the kind of dramatic change that we think is critical to this work. Once you make that shift, and you actually have students owning responsibility for defining the pathway and the pace of their own learning, it has strong implications for the roles of teachers and all of the staff in the school, as well as the student. We haven't been training our students to think about being responsible for their own learning. We haven't put them in that position of empowerment and responsibility, because our 19th century model puts them in a much more passive role, where they are receiving and then responding back to us in fairly superficial ways what it is that we're expecting of them. Making that shift will have dramatic effects on the role of the teacher, and then beyond that, the way we organize the teacher's role, the teacher's time, teacher relationships with students. That one fulcrum we think is critical to the organizational model for the entire school. If we're going to expect these higher capacities of our students that include the higher order thinking skills, creativity, and collaboration that we think is important, we need to begin assessing these skills in new and creative ways. So another critical principle to our work is the use of performance assessments. It's richer performance assessments that in fact are going to become part of the state's accountability model by 2014 here in New York State. We are moving to that kind of assessment model, formative assessment model now, creating much richer performance tasks that enable and expect students to demonstrate actual competencies rather than just spending 54 hours in a semester in order to earn a semester-length credit for a course. In addition to that, as you're identifying learning pathways for every student and they're progressively demonstrating that competency or those proficiencies, you're moving them through on their own pace. And that mastery-based grading is around each student's individual learning pathway. And finally, the last design principle that we're following is this idea of multiple learning modalities. And we anchor our thinking about that in the nature of a 21st century workplace. When you think of the way that we work today, it's entirely in teams around projects with defined timelines and deliverables. The boundaries of those teams are flexible. We identify people that we need to bring expertise and information. We use technology to collaborate, to communicate. We give feedback to one another. We don't work in standard periods of 42 minutes a day and set kind of weekly curriculum. That's just not the nature of the 21st century workplace. So we want to translate into our school environment models from 21st century workplace where students are working in teams, they're working one-to-one, they're working in large groups, they're working with experts beyond the school. That kind of flexibility is critical not only for preparing them for the environments they'll be working in when they graduate, but also because of the engagement. When you enable students to work more flexibly that way, and obviously you can see the kind of responsibility you're putting on students and teams of students when they need to begin working this way, it's also empowering them, and the level of engagement increases dramatically. So all 5 of these taken together are kind of the design principles that we're setting out to engage what will be 200 schools over the next 3 years to develop a blueprint for how they will realize this vision of personalized mastery learning in their schools. This is a big challenge that we've set for ourselves, and we know we can't do this on our own. So we have a strong effort to recruit partners who have experience in doing this kind of work, who can work with our schools to engage in this 3-year plan. Our steps in this process are to recruit. Right now we're recruiting our networks in schools who believe that this approach to teaching and learning will really achieve the much more dramatic outcomes that they're targeting. As we recruit those networks in schools, in parallel we're recruiting a portfolio of partners who can work with us. Partners like Kunskapsskolan, who have experience in running schools around these kinds of personalized mastery learning models. By January, we will be kind of brokering partnerships between these partners and our networks of schools, and they together will enter into a co-design process between January and March to develop out their blueprint and their 3-year roadmap for how they will realize this vision. That roadmap will include prototyping specific components. This is not something you can ingest, that you can take on immediately in a few months. This is going to be a long process, 3-year commitment. And so developing out the sequencing of how schools will move to this new model. They'll be prototyping components of this, and we'll be supporting that prototyping, we use that phrase intentionally, with strong evaluation around which of these components is working. Is it feasible? Can it be implemented? Is it having impacts on student engagement and on student outcomes? What are the implications for our school's capacity, our teachers' capacity to work in these ways? Lots of evaluation, not in the sense of program evaluation, but more in terms of R&D, research and development, testing these components and then progressively building them together into this coherent model so that by the end of 3 years, there is community-level commitment to this work. Our model for scale is also built in from the beginning. In New York City, we're organized with around networks of schools, 20 to 25 schools who have affiliated around a common vision, pedagogical philosophy, shared view on their work, and have existing mechanisms for sharing knowledge and sharing practice. As we move into this work, we're not recruiting individual schools, we're recruiting networks. Those networks will identify 5 schools who will come out of the gate starting with this work in March with that design and planning and then launching next fall. And they'll have 5 affiliate schools who will be kind of in the wings learning about this process as they come online in 2012. And then those 10 schools will have 10 affiliate schools who will also be in the wings learning and then coming online in 2013. But it's the role of the network to facilitate that diffusion in scale, supporting that transfer of practice, and we use a model of communities of practice, communities of engagement, and communities of interest to facilitate that diffusion across the entire network. There's both a push and a pull to this work. Building capacity, investing is a critical piece of this. And so we know we need to build the capacity of our networks and schools to take on this innovative work. So new school leaders is a big part of this. Incubating new school leaders out of these schools that are doing this work and enabling them to create new schools along these models within these networks. Increasing the level of support that we're getting from networks, bringing in these innovation partners from outside of the school system, working on the community and family investment in this work, and then critical technology tools. These are all the conditions and capacities, or the capacities that are required to support this work. Briefly around some of those tools, we've identified online learning as a critical piece to this, enabling these schools to incorporate online learning flexibly to support those personalized learning plans for every student, scheduling that comes around that. Another critical piece to this is what we call our mastery tracker, which is right now nothing more than a concept, but we're looking for providers who may be able to provide this for us. If you're talking about personalized learning plans for every student and they're demonstrating mastery from a variety of different learning opportunities, performance tasks, portfolios, that all has to be mapped to a competency framework and progressively showing developing mastery across that framework over time. We need a tool that enables us to do that so that we can bring together those richer assessments in a way that it's progressively building toward demonstrated mastery. We think e-portfolios is a fundamental part of this work, the scheduling that's required to support students working in these multiple modalities in the performance assessments. This right now is the kind of fundamental technology platform that we'll be prototyping parts of this and building toward an enterprise level. On the other side, in order to create the pull, are the policies, the policy aspect of this that's also critical. And so moving away from seat time, moving toward demonstrated mastery, as the Chancellor referenced this morning, critical piece to this, and we're working with the state on allowing us to pilot these models that allow students to earn credits based on demonstrated mastery rather than seat time. Accountability is a critical piece of this. Right now we operate under a very high-stakes model with our school progress reports, quality reviews. We're looking into how can we create a safer place for these schools to pilot new practices that may not produce results in the first year. And so we want to create an environment where they're not penalized for that risk-taking. As I said, this has implications for our staffing, our teacher roles, our titles, and we're looking at new titles, new teacher roles, and how that can be supported in negotiation with the union. And then funding models. One critical piece of this in New York State, we have a pretty strong funding stream around textbooks. We'd like to find greater flexibility in using those funds, not just for printed textbooks, but also for digital resources and computers as we move into a 21st century model of teaching and learning. Here's our goals for transforming the system of schools. We have what I've been describing are the iZone schools, which is this whole school transformation, and our goal by 2013 to have 200 schools on a pathway toward this whole school transformation. In parallel to this is our online learning work, which we call iLearn NYC, which will be supporting those 200 iZone schools, but will also be expanding otherwise to another 240 schools. So that within 3 years, we have 440 schools on this pathway toward much more personalized mastery-based learning. So that's the context for our work. I really am most excited to let you hear from a principal and a teacher who've been engaged in this work and can give you kind of the feel for how this looks on the ground. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I'm going to stay here. This is on. In 2008, we were asked to start a high school charged with rethinking high school for the 21st century, with the notion that the chancellor said that if people woke up after 150 years sleep, they wanted to walk into our high school and see something completely different. And what we knew was that while in a lot of places in America, we talk about seeing something really different means you see a lot of technology, that rethinking high school was not about putting a lot of technology in place. It was about rethinking what, when, where, and how we teach students and how students are experiencing learning. So our charge was to rethink all of those things and assume nothing because that's how it's been done since the beginning, and question everything that we do. And while we were charged with doing this, it was a very explicit charge that the DOE is wonderful at creating amazing schools, individual amazing schools. But this was about transforming a system. And so that nothing we were supposed to do in our school would be unreplicable across a larger system. And the school was set up with supports from central office in order to create an iSchool that parts of it could be spread out across the system, the whole model could be taken to other schools, and that we could really have a spread of innovation across the system. And we started this in an environment that the chancellor had already set up where, as principals, we had complete autonomy over what we could do, that we could teach while we have state standards, how we address those standards was completely up to us, that we were going to be held accountable for very specific student achievement results, but how we achieved those student results was up to us, and with a very conscious notion from the chancellor's office on down that it was our job to find where we were getting stuck and that they would move the system for us. So when we hit a block with a state regulation, we went to the office and said, we can't do what we know is in our students' best interest, and they helped us as much as they could to find workarounds for all of those blocks. And that enabled us to come up with a very unique instructional model. Our students spend a portion of their time each day doing what we call individualized learning, what Arthur calls personalized learning. It's when students work at their own pace, and I work with 14 to 18-year-olds, so their own pace is not actually their own pace, but it is an individualized pace that is supported by a teacher, to achieve the requirements that they need to graduate high school. In New York State, we have Regents exams, so our students take online individualized courses to move themselves through the content and skills they need to do well on these exams, and that each student is experiencing a different online classroom based on his or her individual needs. And students spend different amount of times in these online classes based on prior knowledge, skill, and efficacy in going through these courses. We are able to individualize at a very low data point level so that we can really target students where they need the support and the content knowledge and allow them to skip the areas of where they already have content knowledge. Through this, we've been able to dramatically accelerate how our students experience the New York State curriculum. The majority of our students complete all of their requirements at the end of 10th grade in 2 years, rather than in the 4 years it takes most students to do that. But our online learning component does not address what we talk about as the 21st century skills. It does not teach them their higher order thinking skills. It does not teach them the collaborative skills. It does not teach them problem-solving skills, creative thinking skills. All of the skills that we talk about as students needing to be successful in college and in when they graduate from college. And so students work on that part of our curriculum and what we call learning modules. These are 9-week challenge-based units where our students work as consultants to nonprofits, private companies, and public organizations throughout the city and the world, and learn through doing actual work that organizations need to get done. So, for example, there is an organization called the National September 11th Memorial and Museum. It is a museum that will open at Ground Zero at some point in the future. And they have professional exhibit designers. And one of the permanent exhibits at this museum when it opens is going to be an adolescent exhibit. And the exhibit designers came to us, there are a staff of 3 at the museum, that in order to design a good exhibit, you need to know what kids are walking into the exhibit thinking about 9/11. And you can't, unless you know what people know and think, you can't design a good exhibit. But we know we're going to be an international museum, and we have no way of finding out what kids around the world think about 9/11. And luckily, I have a consulting staff of hundreds. So in our class, we studied 9/11. We put it in historical context, going back to the Crusades. We studied in social studies the notion of context, that in the sciences we talk to students about doing an experiment and everyone observing that experiment is supposed to see the exact same thing. And in the social sciences, what we talk about how nobody interprets the same event the same way. And that's because of our religious background, our ethnic background, a political background, all of the context that goes into making how we define a group. And our students picked a place in the world, and they just studied what about that place might someone from there inform their context of how they perceive 9/11. Then they video conferenced with students from that place, talking to them about their understanding of what were the events that led up to 9/11, what actually happened on that day, what were the ramifications. Turned those interviews into monologues, which they then reported back to the museum. The museum had 100 different perspectives of composite children from around the world that are actually now part of museum archives and on display at the Tribute Center, which is what the museum currently has standing. And our kids talked to kids in London who talked about the relationship between the US and Britain going back historically. They talked about what was going on in the Iraq War and the support that US was getting. And they talked about the London bombing and their experience with terrorism on this level. And we talked to kids in Israel who talked about terrorism being a regular part of life, and that informed how they viewed it and transformed how our kids see a whole part of the world. And kids talked to kids who looked just like them in Saudi Arabia, who talked about what 9/11 was like, that day was like in their country, which was very different from what we experienced as New Yorkers. And they even talked to American kids in Mississippi and Louisiana who talked about the government response to Hurricane Katrina, and that was informing how they talked about 9/11. So our students were able to learn a lot about their environment, to study the notion of social context and understanding parts of the world and how they fit together and interact in a way that is engaging and thoughtful and real world to them. The other element we use is distance learning extensively. So we do believe that the notions that there are teachers out there who are experts and that our students can use technology to engage with them on a real basis. Our students, the chancellor talked at lunch about the AP conversation with the state, and our students do take AP classes virtually in another school. I think all of this was enabled by, within the school, a system that allowed for a co-leadership model. We are the only co-leadership in the entire system, and the chancellor saying you can innovate at every part of the organization, and a real public-private partnership that we were started with, a partnership with Cisco Systems, where we were really working together to solve these problems and using real-world models. And outside the school, an environment that truly encouraged innovation, where we were told we could take risks and we could fail, and that was okay, and having very clear benchmarks for success. So when even people questioned what we were doing, because there were these citywide accepted standards for success that people knew we were successful, even if sometimes our methods were questioned. And the ability to really be very public and supported by the system above us for what we were doing. So that's how we used innovation at the school level.
Thank you.
Okay, is mine on too? Everyone can hear me? As you said, I've taught 10 years here in Harlem. Currently, I'm at 127th Street. And most of my students in grade 3, 4, and 5 all have a real variety of academic, social, and emotional needs. And from the beginning of teaching 10 years ago, I've been trying to help 21st century learners and keep the classroom an exciting place. And I've always done that with no more than 3 or 4 desktop computers in the classroom and real basic technology. This year, as a result of a lot of what Arthur spoke about, my classroom is a part of something called the iZone. So in addition to a smart board, a projector, and a laptop that I have as the teacher, we have 20 netbooks in the classroom. And I can tell you it has completely transformed the classroom. So I think the best way to explain, and what I can share is just to give some examples. During Literacy Block, we are studying an author, Nikki Grimes, who has written several different books about the African American experience here in Harlem. And one of the children, we start talking about how to gather more information about Nikki Grimes. So of course, within moments, one of them wants to take out a netbook, starts to research Nikki Grimes. After this child does that, I bring her up to the front. She uses my laptop to broadcast on the smartboard the steps that she's taken to research this author. Now during social studies, this child and another child are going to lead a research group with 12 netbooks in the back, while I get to work in the front with our text, which is on a 3rd grade level. Most of our students are not on a 3rd grade level. So I'm now working with a group of 10 students, while 2 students are leading their own group of 6 students, and all this is happening at the same time. And what's really exciting for me about it is it's an example of how taking a part of our curriculum comes to life, and also the children do this in school, and then go and can do it in their local libraries, and they can do it at home. Another example, we have a child who just came from Yemen this year, speaks no English. I'm able to assign him work on the netbook with software that comes with the netbooks. Compass Learning is called, offers language arts and mathematics activities for the children. I have access to work grades K through, I think we have access K through 5. So I have this child on a netbook with phonemic awareness and basic alphabet skills, while other children are using the same device to do 2nd or 3rd or 4th grade work on a topic that they need help on. And I heard you talk about on the high school level the idea of being able to meet the child where they are, give them practice on what they need so they're not learning things that they already know, and they're also able to use what they're good at to help their classmates. And that's one of the most exciting things I've seen, is the children really step up to take their own leadership with the netbooks. I have a child who is an academic struggler himself, who works with this child who just came from Yemen, and I've watched him become so much more confident in his own academics because he's able now to be someone who's explaining something to someone else, as opposed to most of his educational experiences being the one there at the bottom of the class who's always saying he doesn't know what's going on. We have students in the classroom who are performing above grade level. These students are doing above grade level work where they can, and they also work as monitors throughout the classroom to assist other students who are struggling with the work that they're doing using the computer, whether it's as a research group or doing the assigned work through Compass Learning. Another thing that Compass Learning offers is the child themselves, since they each log into their own account, can monitor their own progress by clicking on what's called a backpack and seeing, okay, the teacher assigned me this skill. I'm practicing it. They can look at how they did on it and even go in and reassign the activity to themselves. So I have a system in place for them to assess themselves on a weekly basis and say, okay, out of everything that I've been asked to do this week, what do I need now to do to be sure that I can show that I've really mastered a skill? It's a challenging job being a teacher because it's our job to take all of this policy and all of these changes which I know we say there's many things that haven't changed, but in 10 years of teaching, I've seen a whole lot change every single year. But, you know, these changes come, and the tools to really make these changes possible don't always come. And for me, that's what's so exciting about being part of the iZone, is having this class set of netbooks so that when a real question emerges out of a real conversation, we actually have a tool to turn around and take a next step with it. And I'm very, very excited as to how this new initiative has transformed my classroom and really allowed me to keep up with children in a way that I haven't been able to before. And I really appreciate the opportunity also to be here, because as a teacher, we're not always given the opportunity to step out of the classroom and see what's happening on even our own city level, let alone an international level. So I think it's all very, very exciting. And the most exciting thing to me is really having an opportunity to get the tools and make a reality of a lot of the policy that we talk about and we hear about. So I hope that we will continue to be an iZone school, and I hope that I will find that many other classrooms, so I think about 6 of our classrooms in my school now, but many other classrooms across the city will have the opportunity, because it's difficult to keep up with a 21st century learner without 21st century tools. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's very helpful in this panel to see something from the ideas all the way down to the actual implementation. We'll have plenty of time for questions, but before we do, we have a comment from Commissioner Marsilio from Rome.
Ringrazio di questo invito, dell'opportunità di confrontarci in questa conferenza internazionale.
The opportunity to share opinions in this international conference, to exchange views and learn about other people's experiences in order to move towards innovation and motivate our children to achieve their objectives through their school education is vital. Roma Capitale, the Roman municipality is deeply committed to this in a framework where the central government sets the overall plans and recruits personnel, and the current government is promoting a reform which is in line with what Bloomberg, the New York mayor, said earlier today. We're talking about motivation, accountability, promoting merit, and promoting new assessment systems. So I think that our countries, or I mean your country and Italy, or the New York administration and the Roman administration are definitely moving in the same direction. Within this overall framework, Rome is focusing on school reform in terms of being able to provide schools with a greater autonomy in terms of setting their curriculum, targeting them so that some issues that were not lacking can be targeted. So ever since we started in our administration, we've provided a number of options that schools can select from in terms of creating what we call POF, formative training plans. We start from history, of course. In our city, history is very important, so we call that projects based on memory. I just got back from a trip to Poland with over 200 students, where we went to visit the Auschwitz concentration concentration camp. And based on that, we started a project which is based on teacher training and teacher updating in terms of working on what the Holocaust was. And at a later stage, students have to come up with a project. It can be a video project, it can be a piece of writing or a work of art. And then we will show this to the entire city through an exhibit. And we work on many levels on what we call memory projects. And we did that with a number of projects on many events of the 20th century. For example, we went to Berlin on the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. We are going to go to Prague later on in terms of learning what happened in Eastern Europe. So overall, we work to reject any kind of totalitarian approach or philosophy, and we want to promote critical thinking in our students. We believe very deeply in this, so we don't just want to communicate facts to our students, but we want for them to learn to think independently. I believe that through these projects and these initiatives and what we call an active type of learning, in our case based on history or recent and contemporary history, well, I believe we will empower our students. Also, we're working on projects to prevent social inequalities, and in particular, we're working on promoting bullyism episodes. In Rome, there have been cases of vandalism in schools or gang-like attitudes, in particular in the lower income neighborhoods. So together with the police forces that shared, worked with us on creating projects to promote accountability, and we were able to promote new projects. So we talked about creating labs in schools in order to include. And I was interested in hearing what you were saying about including people that are not traditionally part of the school system, finding new partners, external partners. That's exactly what we're doing in terms of prevention of violence and gang-like attitudes. So these projects will start in the new school year, creating networks between private, enterprises and schools and the police force, including parents and teachers for this common end. Likewise, we are creating a network based on the incredible historical and cultural and natural resources of our city. And through this network, our schools can really have great opportunities for active learning, because we can take children to visit historical sites or natural parks that are actually literally on our footsteps. So and we also have an incredible library system that we are making sure our students get familiar with. Likewise, in line with what you have been trying to experiment, we want to promote creativity and expression of individualism through exhibits that where students can experiment being a protagonist of their own lives and creation. We have a project called Informa Giovani, literally inform young people, and we are creating activities where young people can create material that allows other young people to understand how the workplace works. We can promote projects also on the promotion of health. In particular, we are working on our school cafeterias. In terms of numbers, we provide 130,000 meals every day in primary schools, and in particular in preschools, and also junior high schools and high schools. well, I'm talking about junior highs, like 8 to 10. We provide a very well-balanced menu, and we use that as an opportunity to promote nutritional competence. And we focus on the Mediterranean diet, Mediterranean-style eating, which was recently identified by UNESCO as World Heritage. So, as I said earlier, the prevention of obesity is also promoted through an innovative idea of including tutors that specialize in fitness, and we've been doing that starting from preschools. We allocated 3 million euros for these preschools so that all families can have the opportunity to take part in this fitness program, which I think is important both in terms of the creation of a more rounded well-being based on what sports can do in terms of promoting sociality and all those elements that were discussed earlier today. In terms of the project that I was supposed to talk about here today, we are also focusing on the issue of immigration and integration of migrant populations, because in recent years we have had significant migration trends. In Rome, we are in line with national average, that is 8.9% of the total school population of immigrant children. But in Rome, there was a very there was an imbalance, because some schools had much higher numbers of non-Italian students where others had none. So we put into place new initiatives, which we called local agreements, in terms of spreading this kind of presence, because we believe that the presence of non-Italian children is an enrichment, and we want for them to be equally divided in all schools. So this project is leading to great results, also because we have had the opportunity to experiment such initiatives and projects, in particular in preschools. And we have over 800 schools between 0 to 3 and 3 to 5-year-old schools, preschools. And I believe that these kinds of schools are ideally suited to reach our target of inserting migrant populations in the school system. And I also believe that all these actions targeted at integration, if started very early, in the early childhood years, well, they can lead to a much deeper integration. Thank you very much.
Time for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, make a comment, please come up to the mic and identify yourself.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Tetsuro Ozawa from Tokyo. Sorry for my poor English. My present job is mainly focused on teachers training with respect to ICT, such as smart board, projectors, and we have already spent $40 million to set all those things to metropolitan high schools. And according to the survey we did this year, more than 20% of teachers have been hesitating to use those things in his or her lessons. And I'd like to ask you how the role of teachers has been changed or not with ICT, or if so, how, and more. I think sometimes students have much more knowledge than teachers. So how about so-called digital divide? Is there any kind of that among teachers or even in the students?
Can I try to answer that one? Yeah, I mean, one thing I found right away is that, and I meant to say this, but it's very different talking to adults than children. Just get a little nervous. The students are so excited, just excited to have the technology in the classroom, and even more than them is the parents. So anytime you can have the parents witness the smart board being used, when we did our first open house, my third grade colleague and I presented to the parents on the smart board, and we had them, everybody's taking pictures with their cell phone because they felt so excited that this is what their children, that third graders would be leaving the classroom with a real knowledge of technology and expectation of technology. So I think a lot of teachers are hesitant. Myself, I didn't know how to use it. So you have to make sure we have someone in the building who is a technology specialist, who's in my room several times a day to model for me how to use it, and to assist me when things go wrong. It's difficult because it's new, and I think it's about convincing teachers that it actually makes less work for us to use the technology.
Let me ask, while if there's other questions, someone else can come to the mic. Are the teachers in your startup schools, they're sort of self-selected in, so they're already enthusiastic? And is that part of the phase-in strategy, is to get some proselytizers out there who are confident about it?
I think it's a combination. I shared with Arthur at the beginning that every year in my first years at this school, they said, Ms. Goldman, do you want a smart board? And I said, no, thank you. You can take it across the hall. And this is the third year I've been offered one, the first year I've taken it. And it was absolutely because I was afraid. I didn't know how to use it. And I've definitely had to rely on the children a lot, always telling me, don't be nervous, you'll be fine, you can do it. So I think a lot of it is just really having that conversation that it is something new and it is something to help us. But I think it's a combination, and I myself was definitely someone who said no thank you. So the knowing I have the support to do it, and again, actually having enough of the tools to make it something that we can use, I think encouraged. But many people are on board because looking around this morning as people were talking, everyone had some kind of device in their hand. So.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Cindy Kerr. I'm a network leader, and I was just wondering, from a school design or curriculum design perspective, what surprised you that you needed to teach students? And what I was thinking about was both of you mentioned that students were doing research. Did you find that you had to do a lot of research scaffolding for students, or did they know how to do that? And the same with teachers. What skills did the teachers not have that surprised you? And it's a little bit different than just the technology, because both of you talked about good pedagogy in terms of the center of what the kids are doing is about thinking. So just if you can talk to that a little bit.
Our first big surprise was that our kids don't know how to read online. That you give them a text on paper, and once they've gotten to high school, most of them have developed some level of skill at decoding that text to make sense for comprehension. And you give them that same text online and they have nothing. And so we have to teach 14-year-olds who can read on a 14-year-old level or on a 16-year-old level how to read online. And that takes most kids a few months to learn how to transfer their decoding skills. And it has to be consciously taught. The other thing we teach much more explicitly than we ever thought we would teach was metacognition. And when teaching kids online, they have to learn at a much higher level when they know something, and there's not as much of the adult feedback. I mean, even though we have online graded quizzes and whatnot, in a traditional classroom, the teacher tells you when you know something and when you're ready to move on. And in a self-paced online course, that is very, on some level, student-driven, and they have to know, when am I ready to take the summative test on this section so I can see if I can move on. And teaching kids to know that accurately is a huge part of what we do. Now, of course, we do teach research skills, but I've never been in a school where we didn't teach research skills. I mean, I feel like we don't assume students know anything. But they know a lot, I'm not saying that way, and that we have to teach a lot. I think, also the question about technology is, whenever you're hiring teachers, every teacher, even the best teacher we hire, is going to need growth in some area. And so as a school leader hiring teachers, we have to decide where do we want to focus our instruction with teachers. And to me, it's much easier to teach a teacher how to use a smartboard than it is to teach a teacher to believe that kids can learn from working together and struggling with a problem and learn that way. So we hire very much to a belief about how students learn, and then with the notion that we will have to teach them how to use the technology, how to integrate the technology, and in fact, that's, for us, much easier to teach.
Hi, my name is Rafael Parente. I'm from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And actually, it's more a request than a question, because we also have been building a learning platform, online platform with digital classes that we have been testing in some schools. The results have been very positive. And starting February, we're going to start projecting the activities, the videos and games and quizzes and everything on the classrooms of 420 classrooms in Rio. And all the content is there in this platform. But what we're thinking is, within this platform, we need to have a kind of a formative assessment, just like when a kid plays Wii Sports, tennis, for example, and he's playing, but at the same time you have a graph being built there, because there is an intelligence behind the system that says if the student that is using that system is doing okay or not, if he's developing those abilities or not, how well he's doing, right? And also, if we can insert some kind of game-based or project-based feeling and characteristic into these platforms, then perhaps we're going to have a great thing, because what we want to do is we want to have our kids engaged and addicted to learning, right? So my question is, if New York City, the Department of Education, perhaps other partners would be able and would like to keep on sharing, because I know that we're going to see a platform, because you talk, but we kind of try to visualize. So how does that go? What kind of environment do they go into? What do they experiment? It's very enriching to hear you talking about the experience, but I'm trying to visualize the systems and the platforms, and I know that many of them are based on licensed and softwares, Brain Honey and others, but as long as possible, perhaps we could continue exchanging experience about these platforms, and perhaps even sharing platforms among different cities and different countries.
Let's Skype.
Are you familiar with Project Lumiar in Brazil?
Yeah.
And in Sao Paulo, and we're very interested to learn more about that platform, actually, because I think it has a lot. The Mosaic platform has a lot of these kind of competency-based progressions, and being able to tag content, learning activities, digital resources, and performance tasks to that. So I think that's the kind of the next generation platform that we are trying to engage the industry in moving toward, that is not tightly integrated around a single vendor's solution or a single kind of assessment, like multiple choice assessment, but allowing a variety of different kinds of assessment to contribute to definitions of mastery, project-based, challenge-based, portfolio-based, as well as multiple choice, giving that formative progress. So we're trying to kind of express our requirements out to the industry and partners to try to push in that direction. But we're looking for innovative models. We've discovered what we saw in Mosaic, and very interested to continuing the conversation.
So I think the ending to fall on the exchange of information and the interest in continuing the exchange is a good place to end this session. Let's thank the panelists.